things can change, but I think that there's perhaps quite a lot of, factors in this coming to fruition at this point, not least the fact that you've got the financial position of the club, the PSR calculations and Kobbie Mainoo being an academy product, and the kind of potential windfall that gives the club to then reinvest. I mean, it's kind of distasteful, isn't it, to talk a bit about it in those terms, but it's just the reality. So,
hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe. That is Laurie Whitwell, and this is Inside United. Loads to talk about today. Obviously, the latest on Kobbie Mainoo. What is going on? Why has this become an issue all of a sudden? And what will happen? Also, transfers. We've got less than a week left of the window. Loads to talk about potential ins. Is there a midfield, a goalkeeper on the way? When will United actually make some sales? We'll get into all of that. But Laurie, first of all, how are you and where are you?
I'm great, thank you, Joe. I'm currently in a cottage in Anglesey with my family. I know it looks like I've been kidnapped and taken hostage and I have to hold up today's newspaper to sort of show that I'm safe and alive. But no, I'm having a great time. Sorry that I can't be with you in the studio. I always love coming into the studio with you guys, although I am grateful not to have had a Dave's Hot Chicken before this episode, given the effects that it had on me last time. But you have, right? You've gone there again.
It was pretty cataclysmic for your voice and throat last time, but I've gone back and I've had a word with Dave, and he said from now on it won't be an issue. You do look like you've been held hostage, but by someone with a pretty decent on-the-road podcast setup. So, you know, it very much narrows down who your captors are, I think. Let's talk about Kobbie Mainoo then. Let's just get straight into this, because I feel as though 2 weeks ago when Mainoo and Ugarte were starting pre-season games looking good, it seemed as though there was a plan there. I could never have predicted that on the 26th of August, me and you would be sat here talking about the huge issue that Manchester United and specifically Ruben Amorim has with Kobbie Mainoo. Before we dig into the details, in the Athletics sort of transfer wrap-up, it's called the deal sheet, that came out this morning, David Ornstein wrote about how Kobbie Mainoo is now willing or open to leave Manchester United, presumably this summer. Obviously, it also mentions that it might be difficult with the amount of time and the sort of number of clubs interested. How have we got to this point, and what is your understanding of where Kobbie's at currently?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating story to observe and to have been sort of looking into throughout the whole summer, really, because if we do trace it back to January, I think that's where this story starts, really, when those first reports came out that United would reluctantly, it was phrased at that time, be open to offers for Alejandro Garnacho, but also Kobbie Mainoo. And at the time, fans were kind of up in arms, weren't they, over sort of both of them, really. And as the situation's developed, the Garnacho one has clearly, gathered pace and got substance. And I think fans have perhaps become more accepting of that being a departure. But then the Mainoo one just feels a lot more personal. It feels totally against really what United should be about in terms of promoting from the academy, a local boy from Stockport, been at the club, since he was a very young boy, 5-6 years old, that fantastic picture of him wearing the United shirt. I'm not sure exactly what age he is, but very young with the sunglasses, looking very cool indeed. But also a technically gifted player that I think fans have really enjoyed watching play, scored big goals at big moments, the FA Cup final and the Lyon game as well, Wolves away. So I think that's why this has kind of perhaps now caused more of a stir, but certainly the seeds were planted back in January. And I think this is something that both sides have perhaps been, having a look at throughout the summer. But yeah, I am of the belief that Kobbie Mainoo, as David Ornstein has written in the deal sheet today, and myself and Mark Critchley also understand that he is open to leaving the club. Now, as you say there's only a limited time left in the transfer window. Can something be done this window? I don't know. I think that would be a real wrench for people. I don't think anyone with a United slant is kind of willing this to happen, but clearly the way that the situation is developing with him not even playing matches, I think you can see from the images at Craven Cottage how disappointed he is. And what does that mean for him, for his career? You've also got to look at England next summer at the World Cup. He's kind of totally out the picture really in Thomas Tuchel's squad at the moment. So yeah, does that then bring to the fore some kind of solution being found in this final few days of the window? But yeah, it's we can get more into the details of it, Joe. But it's a really, I know it's a stunning one, perhaps to be sort of getting into at this point, and it feels like it's come from nowhere. But certainly, it's been, I think, bubbling along for a little bit of time.
It's one of those ones that it makes you just feel a little bit horrible. It's the sort of thing that you just don't expect, especially Man United, and especially, you look back 2 or 3 seasons ago, or 2 seasons ago, you had the likes of Garnacho, of Scott McTominay, of Kobbie Mainoo, all playing regularly. I know Johnny Evans, it's a different situation. He's 35, but he was in the squad all the time. This sort of academy Manchester United angle that is such a consistent through line, and maybe truly the only real bedrock of Manchester United. People talk about fast wing play and counter-attacks and this, that and the other, but I think for me the one thing that has sort of pervaded and been persistent throughout most of United's certainly post-war history is a reliance on youth. And as it stands right now, no academy players start for Manchester United or in the sort of manager's plans even at the moment, which is a bit of a concern I think for a lot of people. Just to dig in, like you said, into the details a little bit on this Mainoo stuff. As far as you're aware, I know we said it started back in January, but how do you think we've got to the point where we were speaking a little bit before we went live about, Adam McCullough spoke to Ruben Amorim before the first game in New Jersey and asked about Kobbie Mainoo. He said in that answer that he has big plans for him and that he can play in multiple positions. We flash forward to the game or the post-match against Fulham, where he's now talking about in training, Mainoo only kind of is the sort of second in command behind Bruno in just in that one position, and that he can play when Bruno isn't playing, and that's his only position he can play in. What has something happened there? How have we got to this point where he's gone from being not just such a sort of bright spark, but seemingly in the manager's plans to seemingly not?
Yeah, I think I'd love to sort of ask Ruben Amorim a little bit more about it, really.
Yeah.
And maybe at that point he was speaking, as a manager expecting his player to still be at the club would do, where you're kind of trying to build them up. And clearly he's certainly said enough things in public that kind of criticise other players or the team collectively. So, kind of getting a bit of positivity around a player that clearly is held warmly in the hearts of a lot of fans, is the right thing to do. But there's obviously a difference, I think, in terms of what Ruben Amorim wants from his central midfielders and what Kobbie Mainoo can provide. I am a little bit curious about this idea that he's only going to be able to replace Bruno Fernandes, which actually was, I think, a question that Critch asked after Craven Cottage, and that was the response from Amorim. That was the first time I've heard him say that's the only kind of role that he's competing for, because you'd sort of think he came into the team as a sort of number 6, really, didn't he? Where he was picking the ball up off defence and beating the press and twisting, turning, providing those passes to start the build-up. So I still think there's a role for him in this team in that regard. Okay, yeah, clearly the issue is the acceleration, maybe the coverage of ground across, for the whole match and that kind of burst of speed. I think Amorim does want that, which is obviously why United looked at Carlos Baleba, who clearly has that in his game. But I do feel like if the system is set up right, then Kobbie Mainoo can certainly shine. He's like I say, he's provided killer moments for Manchester United already in his short sort of career with them. So I don't see why you would disregard that player. And listen, he's never going to replace Bruno Fernandes, is he, really? As long as Bruno Fernandes is running around the pitch and he's captain of Manchester United, he's going to play. I think he's only missed like one maybe game through injury in his whole time at United, and then obviously 1 or 2 through suspension. So yeah, I think that the idea that he can only play in that position is curious, because he came in again at the end of last season. His best role was number 10. It was away in Bucharest, I think, when he scored that goal and looked really sharp. And the injury came at a bad point for him, didn't it? The muscle injury that he sustained kept him out for a lot of the end of last season. So maybe that's been a factor in Amorim's positioning of who he gives importance to. And then obviously they've brought in Matheus Cunha, Bryan Mbeumo. They're going to start because they paid a lot of money for them, and then that limits, I guess, what Mainoo can do, what kind of position he's in. But I'm curious, because you look at Mason Mount and the different positions that he's played in for United so far this season, even centre forward or number 10 and dropping deeper at Craven Cottage. So I think that Mainoo is capable of doing that kind of role. I mean, obviously he did start up top, didn't he, against Crystal Palace at the end of last season. So Amorim has tried him in different roles. So yeah, this stance, I don't know, I hadn't heard it before sort of privately. So that was the first time I'd heard it publicly. And so I'd like to ask him a little bit more about why that is the case. But clearly I think the overall position on Mainoo, you've got a manager that maybe thinks that he's not quite suited to his system. Then you've got a new regime that I think ultimately want to do things their own way. So quite a lot of the players that were part of the previous regime, are kind of judged differently than how they would be if those guys were still in charge. That's fascinating. And also his contract situation, I think, is a key point in all this as well. He's still, on about £20,000 a week, we believe. He signed that contract when he was 17, sort of February 2023. He'd only just come into the team, and all this development since that point, leading up to starting for England at the European Championship final, came after that. So there's been talks ongoing. United aren't at this point willing to, or haven't been willing to meet the sort of requests that Mainoo had been, or at least his representatives have been proposing. And so there's this sort of standoff there, and I think that is maybe colouring the situation, because ultimately, the United will think, well, if we have to commit, big salary now for this player, does that then limit who we might be able to sell him to in future? And I'm not saying that's the correct sort of mindset, but I think that is certainly part of their thinking.
This show is brought to you by FOTMob. FOTMob is basically the best football app on the market in terms of stats, in terms of live data, in terms of player ratings as well. FOTMob has got everything, and I literally use it all the time. Use it during the games, during the watch along, use it in the build up and in the post review, looking at the stats and the data around all of Manchester United's games. Of course, they've got all the live stats that you'd expect, goal scorers, assists, that kind of thing, but they've also got expected goals. They've also got momentum graphs to see who was dominating the game at which time, and so much more as well. They've also got what I think is the best stats-based rating model as well. So when you look at the end of a game, you can see who has played well, and you know that you can trust it. But it's not just that. FOTMob are also doing a massive giveaway: 10 copies of the new EAFC game and 5 Premier League shirts of your choice. Everyone that downloads the app and uses the code PL25 can participate in the giveaway. The link to the app is in the description. To redeem your code, all you have to do is go on the FOTMob app, click more in the bottom corner, then go to settings, scroll down to redeem code, and enter the code PL25, which will then take you to a Google form, and you can participate from there. Make sure you go and check them out if you need any stats, any data on Manchester United and dozens of other leagues around the world, not just the Premier League. Make sure you go and check out FOTMob. It's such a shame, isn't it? I mean, just on the contract thing, obviously it could be, this whole thing could be a bit of sort of back and forth and a bit of, our play here, your play there. Do you think Man United are still interested in him signing a new contract? Is that something that, despite the fact that he's not even playing and that he might be up for leaving, do you think Man United would still like to sign him to an extension?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't sense anything particularly moving on that front at the moment. I need to make a few more checks on it, and there might be something that we can do sort of on the Athletic in due course that kind of gives a real, proper, accurate account of the current landscape. But I'm not hearing anything, Joe, in terms of United, accelerating with talks to kind of get him signed up. And that is obvious, really. If the player isn't going to be featuring in the first team, even when they're losing, at home to Arsenal, even when they're drawing against Fulham, and the manager needs a good start this season, to get that credit back in the bank that he said he lost at the end of last season. Instead, on come Harry Maguire, Aiden Heaven, clearly with a view to set pieces, which Amorim is clearly fascinated by and thinks is a real course to scoring goals, which is true, right? It's definitely the case, but it does feel like that's his sort of default position. If United are losing, send on the big defenders to then get a header for corners. And obviously Maguire did go close, didn't he, with the corner late on. So that's the approach, rather than maybe going for someone like Mainoo, who you'd have to then shuffle around the front three to get him in those kind of positions around the edge of the box where he does score those goals against Lyon, against Wolverhampton Wanderers that have been so vital in different moments so far. So yeah, but I agree with you. I mean, what do you think to it all, Joe? Did you sense this coming, or are you totally blindsided by it that this might happen?
I mean, we could see that there wasn't an obvious and definite place for Mainoo in the starting lineup, and the thing that I'm sort of puzzled by and a little bit sort of downhearted by is how I think for a lot of people it's almost become a Mainoo versus Bruno problem, where it's like if only Bruno left and we got the 90 million or whatever from Saudi, then Mainoo fits. But if Amorim doesn't fancy Mainoo, Is he, A, just going to start fancying him because Bruno isn't here anymore? But B, how brilliant would it be to, instead of replacing Bruno Fernandes, who is our best player, and he's had a couple of bad games, I'll give you that, but look at the man next to him, the 33-year-old Casemiro, who has been on the decline for 2 or 3 seasons. Why is it our captain and best player that we're all sort of turning against? And I'm not saying we should turn against Casemiro by any means, but if you were to buy Baleba, he wouldn't be coming in to replace Bruno, he'd be coming in to replace Casemiro. So maybe we start by replacing the players that aren't quite up to it, and then we can worry about selling our captain and stuff. I just don't like how it's become a sort of, well, if Bruno's got to play instead of Mainoo, let's get rid of Bruno and clear the way for Mainoo. It doesn't appear that Amrim's thinking that way to me, and again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but if he loved Mainoo that much, I think he would find a way to play him. My worry is, I don't know if Amrim knows quite the significance of what is going on at the moment. Because, admittedly, if we'd have finished third last season, we'd have won the first 2 games or got 4, draw against Arsenal, beat Fulham comfortably, this probably would be all right. You can drop a player here and there, and Mainoo doesn't necessarily have to play every minute. But when you've got such an exciting, talented player on the bench and we're still not winning, and he's an academy player, and he's someone that plays such an exciting sort of, mercurial kind of, the dummies and the feints and that skill that he has on the ball, Mainoo. Do you think Amrim understands quite the public support that Mainoo has? Do you think he gets it?
Yeah, that'd be a really good question to ask at a press conference, Joe, because sort of wider than all that, as you sort of alluded to at the start of this episode, the link going back to 1937 where United have had an academy graduate in the squad consistently every single game for like 4,230 odd, I think it is now. And listen, it wasn't a thing when Sir Alex Ferguson was manager. He didn't know about it, particularly. I think it only became something after he retired, but it is still something I think to cherish. And maybe the fact that it was just happening naturally shows the kind of club that United were and should be. And so I think if you take Kobbie Mainoo out, that is a serious risk of it being broken, because Tyler Fredrickson was involved, certainly in the first couple of squads. Will he really still be involved, if United do sign any more players? There's also the fact that United don't have as many games, right? I know this doesn't necessarily totally correlate with the link to 1937, but the fact that Mainoo might be thinking, well, there's not the Europa League for me to get minutes in, this season or whatever. So that is a factor in all this as well. But yeah, I do think it carries great significance that you've got a kid here who came to United at a very young age, has been brought up through the academy, clearly loves the club, in a sense of the kind of supporter attachment, and then there's a separate thing, I suppose, as a professional football player, you've got to do what's best for your career. But yeah, that's a good question to ask him. If say he starts against Grimsby, does well or not, let's ask the question after that maybe.
I think as well the fact that Bruno did have such a poor game against Fulham, and Mainoo still didn't get to be his kind of, his stand-in or second in command or whatever for that position. I think that was an interesting one for people as well. But yeah, I'd love to know if, and this is going to sound awful, but some of the things that Ineos have done and the cuts and stuff, and obviously on a personal level, Kobbie Mainoo isn't going to lose his job here. He might move to a different club, but he's not going to be without a source of income for long. And if he does, he's been earning 20 grand a week for the last 3 years, which by footballers' terms isn't a lot, but is more than probably anyone watching this video has ever been on. But for some reason, I think we can accept that. I don't know why, but that seems to be more palatable. The idea that Man United are straying away from what they have been for so long, and like you said, it just almost went under the radar for granted under Fergie that you'd have at least 2 or 3 academy players, probably in the starting 11, let alone in the squad. Now it's almost like, is this 87-year record, or exactly what it is, this long record, going to just be something that either A, gets broken, or B, more likely, is a box-ticking exercise, and every week you've got a rotating under-18s player that you've never heard of sitting on the bench just so we don't break it. United want to be a team that has academy players and looks to use academy players to be successful, not just to carry on a record that happens to be going whilst you're selling all your best players. So I think that is a bit of a worry for me and others, I think. Just finally on Mainoo, obviously, I know you're not saying that it's beyond repair and all that, but how do you see this sort of going? Do you think that Amrim will change his mind? Do you think that Mainoo will stay? Like, again, I know it's just opinion, and I don't want people to confuse that with you some sort of exclusive here. But how do you feel in all this? How do you see this going?
Yeah, just purely from my own opinion.
Yeah.
It's obviously just so late in the window. I mean, United haven't yet sold a player, so to then sell, a player like Kobbie Mainoo, I don't know. I'm sceptical that they'll make it happen. If they do, if he does, there's so many different variables in it to actually, come to a conclusion in the final week of the window when it's not been sort of rumbling along for weeks and months in terms of active negotiations. So yeah, I would imagine personally, I can see him staying, but then to change Amorim for changing his mind, I'm not sure. He seems pretty sort of stubborn over certain aspects, and I suppose maybe Casemiro's a good counterpoint to that, because he was obviously out of the team entirely, and it felt like he was going to be jettisoned. He then trained well, and he got selected, played well, and kind of Amorim then kept him in the team, and obviously now he's still started into his 4th year at United, which certainly didn't look the case, did it, at the end of Erik ten Hag's 2nd season, when it felt like Casemiro would definitely be departing. So yeah, things can change, but I think that there's perhaps quite a lot of factors in this coming to fruition at this point, not least the fact that you've got the financial position of the club, the PSR calculations, and Kobe Mainoo being an academy product, and the kind of potential windfall that gives the club to then reinvest. I mean, it's kind of distasteful, isn't it, to talk about it in those terms, but it's just the reality. So yeah, I think that they're different factors that come to play, and that's how I see it. But yeah, let's see. It's a week to go in the window. I guess anything can happen.
Hopefully, the fact that it is a week means that it doesn't get done. We have to sort of wait and think, and between now and January, or now and next summer, things can be repaired and we can start winning games, and Mainoo can be a part of that. Let's talk about other midfielders, because before we knew that Mainoo and Amorim had not necessarily fallen out, but that there was this sort of issue there. We were in for other midfielders in the other slot. So you got your Bruno and Mainoo slot, then you've got your sort of everyone else slot. Carlos Baleba was a name that was obviously broken by The Athletic and David Ornstein, I believe, and yourself. There hasn't been really many other names mentioned there. Do you expect United to go in for a midfielder in this last week, or is it a sort of Baleba or no one and we'll wait till next year kind of situation?
Yeah, I get the sense that they really were hopeful, or at least, I suppose hopeful maybe is too strong, but if they could do Baleba, they would be ecstatic, basically. So do they now change course from that if it means that they then don't get to do him in January or next summer, let's say? And I'm not saying that United are the only club that would be in for him at those points, but they clearly have put the groundwork in so far to try and get him. So yeah, I don't get the sort of strong feeling that they're going to go for somebody else. I know that Hojlund's been mentioned, and Wharton, and clearly they're players that they have scouted and no doubt have got certain degrees of admiration for. But I think that maybe Baleba's the one that if they could do, that they would do, and maybe they're sort of keeping the powder dry for other opportunities on him later, or even just making sure that they've got the finances, because as I say, they still haven't signed anybody yet. So to get Baleba through the door, I think will still take some financial chicanery. But I think the fact that they have also sort of slightly changed approach at different times during this transfer window means that I'm kind of a little bit cautious about coming down categorically either way. Hopefully that's not too much of a cop-out for people, but yeah, I think certainly Baleba's one that they would love to do still.
Just on the Baleba front, and obviously this is my little conspiracy theory, United and Amorim, sort of as the mouthpiece at United, has come out and said that we don't need to really make sales to buy more players even now. I think he said that, he certainly hinted at that in the last press conference, I think, about, we're not too worried about having to sell players. Obviously, we are trying to sell players. Do you think there's a possibility, let's say, we'll get to all these players, by the way, but Hojlund, Garnacho, Sancho and Anthony go for either an upfront 80 million, 90 million, or a promised 110 million, or whatever it may be, obligations, options, whatever. Is there a chance that United then revisit Baleba this window? Do you think that's just a zero chance thing, or do you think, like you said, next summer we'll have had another year of a manager without a defensive midfielder they want? Who knows what Amorim's reputation will be like amongst the fans around that time, especially if Mainoo were to not just leave but be kind of nudged out of the squad or nudged away from minutes. You've also got the opportunity that next season Liverpool might need this kind of player because I think they're lacking in that area. Who knows what Rodri and Man City's kind of time will be like with his injuries and the fact that they seem to be sort of buying new players left, right and centre. Other clubs around Europe may want to look at Carlos Baleba in 12 months. Is there a possibility, you think, that if we maybe do get some sales done, they could revisit him, or do you think it is kind of dead for now?
No, I would never say it's dead, just because they got to the point of him wanting to come, right, and there was obviously talks to that extent. So I would never write anything off, particularly under this regime, particularly when so much is happening already. I don't think it's likely, but at the same time, I wouldn't say it's dead. But that being the case, I think Amorim sort of coming out and saying that they don't need to sell players to buy is a couple of factors. Yeah, I think that's probably accurate in a way, because they can always sell in January, they can always sell before the June 30th deadline next summer if they do want to meet PSR regulations. I also think that you kind of have to sort of put that out there a little bit, because as he did in Chicago with the kind of exile, shall we say, saying that I'll reintegrate them if they don't get sold into my squad after the transfer deadline. I think it's partly a kind of negotiating point, right, to kind of say, listen, we don't have to sell these guys. We can certainly keep them, and they can perhaps be reintegrated, or they can perhaps do their own thing, and but there's no pressure on us. So I think that's part of it. I still do think that United really, if they want to be good with their finances, if they want to comply with the regulation, I do think they need to sell really to kind of balance the books.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, the fact that we sort of might be willing to go into the season with, clearly Amorim, I don't think is fully sure on either Ugarte or Casemiro. Yeah. He's clearly not sure on Mainoo. So of the four kind of holding midfielders that we've got, he only really likes one of them, and Bruno Fernandes is that one who's had 2 poor games and isn't really a holding midfielder. Yeah. There's clearly something that needs doing there, isn't there? Whether it's a shorter term, or not necessarily shorter term, but potentially a cheaper sort of option that could last beyond Casemiro and Ugarte, and then Baleba comes in to join them, or who knows, like we said, could they potentially revisit Baleba thing? Just on the Baleba thing, because I think last time we spoke, it was still not on, but it hadn't been kind of ruled out in the same way. What it was, what it seemed to be was that United didn't like the idea of the price for Baleba. What do you think United expected him to be quoted at? Because wasn't it around 100, 110 million? I know that is a lot, but did United think we could get him for 70 or something? What was the difference there? Do you know?
Yeah, I think at the start of it, that was the kind of indication that maybe he could go for João Pedro money. Obviously, João Pedro, had issues right at Brighton, where in the end he ended up having scraps with teammates. So I think Brighton were like, we'll sell him, get a good price for him. But obviously, I think it did impact the valuation. But I think Brighton were, when it got to the point of it coming to the crunch, I think United then appreciated that Brighton was serious about him not being for sale, or if he was for sale, then it'd be a hefty transfer fee. It's always a bit delicate, I'm not told that any price was ever actually told to United in terms of what it would take. So I think only when you have those kind of direct conversations is that clear. So that's ultimately what ended up happening, where United spoke to people at Brighton and kind of courtesy call, I think, to say, listen, fine, we accept your position, we won't be pursuing it. Obviously the reason why I don't say it's dead is because sometimes that can also itself be a negotiating position. But I think there's some sincerity there, and I think perhaps with Amorim and the players, the teams that he's selecting, he does sort of send messages, doesn't he? I mean, we've touched on with Hojlund already, just excluding him from the squad entirely. I know that's partly a club view as well, but clearly Amorim's the guy that then picks the team, so he does use his team lineups to perhaps send messages and make points, and maybe that's what's happening with the midfield as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I would like to see how we start the season, or how we end the window, should I say, if it isn't to be Baleba, going to another year with Casemiro starting for Man United. That feels like no one saw that coming sort of 2 or 3 months ago. I mean,
does one game a week affect it, do you think? It's just the fact that it's
so.
Less tempo.
I guess
I'm not saying it's the right call.
I'm
just kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah, I think that obviously is in Casemiro's favour, but I still don't think he's, you still see it every single game he plays, that sort of jog sprint up to someone and then does the sort of long range slide tackle to kind of block, trip and intercept all in one, and 50% of the time it looks great, and the other 50 he just gets
it was working against Arsenal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it worked against Arsenal, and then
Fulham were just like, well, actually we'll just play in behind you guys and Bruno won't track us.
Pass it through, yeah. And that would be my worry. Let's move on then a little bit to some of the other positions then. Goalkeeper is an interesting one for two reasons. Onana, one of the first names on the team sheet, literally the first name on the team sheet being the goalkeeper last season, now can't get a minute. Seems to be, I guess, up for sale. I don't know. There hasn't been too much mention of him leaving, but at the same time, he's being played behind Bayindir, who seems to be frail and mistake prone almost every game he plays. So it's not as though he's been replaced by someone that I think consensus is that, he's a lot better than Onana. And at the same time, we seem to be, approaching a deal, or there seems to be a deal in the works for, is it Saint-Lemain? How are we pronouncing Lemain? Lemans?
Oh, I don't know.
How are we going with that?
I've actually asked a Belgian speaker who hasn't got back to me yet. I am just going with Sene Lamans, just because I like the fact that you can then obviously make lots of, lemons puns. When life gives you lemons, for example. Hopefully United can have really some nice lemonade by the end of the season if he joins.
Pour me a glass, thank you.
You'll be all over that after your Dave's hot chicken, won't you?
I'm desperate. My mouth is still burning.
So I mean, again, so this is why I'm expressing caution now whenever I sort of try and commit to a position on Manchester United's transfer policy, because it felt like they weren't going to do a goalkeeper unless Andre Onana was sold. Clearly Andre Onana hasn't been sold, and they're in talks with Royal Antwerp to sign Lamans. So let's see if the deal gets done. I suppose it's slightly, it can be seen simultaneously with that previous stance where United said they wouldn't sign a number one whilst Andre Onana was here. So I suppose Lamans is kind of coming in, if he does come in, as a competitor to Onana, rather than he's definitely going to be having the gloves on. But that being said, as you point out there, Bayindir started the first two games. So is that a message to Onana? I mean, I know Amorim is saying that he felt like Bayindir deserved it after the pre-season, but I do think back to that Aston Villa game actually that finished the Premier League campaign. Bayindir was in goal, Tom Heaton was on the bench, and Onana was left out. And Amorim said, sometimes you just need a kind of refresh, from a player point of view. But obviously it came in the wake of the Europa League final, where Onana, I think you can, sort of question whether he could have done better with the goal. So yeah, we've come now to this position where United are in pursuit of a new goalkeeper. Does it then raise the question of what happens with Onana? Does it raise the question of what happens with Bayindir? My information is that Onana is expected to stay at United. So, again, that leaves a really fascinating dynamic between potentially four goalkeepers. I think United do have AFCON in mind. Onana's expected to go to away with Cameroon for December, January time. I know it's not exactly specific exactly how long he'll be away for, but that then I suppose gives United more comfort with the collection of goalkeepers that they'd have when he is away. So yeah, but I think it's a really interesting development that they are now going for a goalkeeper when previously the kind of messaging had been, we're not going to sign one unless Onana goes, which is why, say the Martinez offer was only a loan deal. That would have been something that they could have perhaps afforded. Donnarumma was declined because his wages are too high. The demands are far in excess of what United could countenance. So ultimately we've come to Lamans, who's 23, developing goalkeeper. If he does come, then it's a world away from Antwerp, right? The scrutiny that you get at Manchester United is absolutely exponential compared to the Belgian Pro League. So that'll be something to sort of keep an eye on. But yeah, really fascinating. I don't know, what do you make of it, Joe? Are you surprised at this development, or could you see this one come in as well?
I'm surprised that he's just being left out on. I still think he's the best keeper we've got at the club.
Yeah.
I think he's made mistakes, and plenty of mistakes, but I feel like his game to mistake ratio is better than Bayindir. Like I know, funnily enough, he wasn't at fault for the goal or the game against Fulham directly as he was against Arsenal, but those in-swinging corners in the first half, he was backpedaling and falling over and flapping. He didn't claim a single one. He didn't stay on his line and look strong for any of them. So it's a sort of tremendous weakness that he appears to have in that area, or certainly at the moment does, that, you know, I feel like Onana isn't worse than that. So yeah, it does feel like you mentioned about sort of other players. He's doing it with Mainoo a bit. He did it with Garnacho and Rashford and Anthony and Sancho and Hojlund, and he is seeming to do this kind of like, you know, I'll show you what I think of these players, not just tell you. And we'll move on to Hojlund now, but the whole, like, he went from being first choice last season to can't get a sniff this season, and maybe it is a sort of a political thing. On Hojlund, I think, you know, it was only a few weeks ago where the reports coming out where Hojlund wants to stay at Man United, he wants to fight for his place, this, that and the other. All of a sudden, not getting any minutes toward the end of pre-season, isn't getting any minutes and isn't even in the squad for the sort of later games and most recent games. Now all of a sudden he seems to be more receptive to leaving, so maybe it does work. But is that seemingly what's going on with Hojlund? Is he on the cusp of a move somewhere? There seems to be loads of clubs mentioned and interested in him.
Yeah, I'm still to be told that he is, you know, okay with leaving, because I mean he came out very publicly in Chicago, wasn't it, where he kind of hunted for the media in the mix zone after scoring what I'm saying is 2 goals against Bournemouth, and yeah, he wanted to stay. Yeah, that's what his message was, very strong, wanted to compete. I still think that has been his viewpoint. You know, he sees Benjamin Sesko coming in and feels that he can certainly compete with him in terms of a skill level and, you know, scoring record. But clearly United have got other ideas, and so therefore there's lots of clubs that are interested. I know that Napoli have been sort of most prominently reported. I feel like there's other clubs also still in the mix on him. But listen, I don't know, it could be them. But I feel like still, yeah, his position is yet to be totally clarified. I guess it's a delicate balance, right? When you've got somebody who has grown up a United fan, does not want to leave the club, you know, that he's, you know, cherished playing for, and then so the kind of project that's proposed to him has got to be right from a sporting point of view, but also a financial point of view. You know, he's still got a contract at United, and if they want to sort of break that, I feel like, you know, he will probably say, well, you know, I need to be correctly treated in that manner. So yeah, it's another kind of brutal treatment for a player who, you know, I think to all accounts, you know, does things professionally, is a good guy to have around, certainly has been dedicated. So yeah, it does kind of run a little bit counter to the kind of idea that only the bad eggs would be excluded from the squad, and, you know, you have to do something to, you know, be left out of lineups. You know, Hojlund clearly at this point now, he's been told, you know, your future is elsewhere, and again, we'll show you by not including you in any squads.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like you said, it's one thing not picking you and not wanting to start you and wanting to sell someone, but like it does seem to be actually no, if I don't fancy you, you're just not getting any minutes, you won't come on, you won't play. In certain cases as well, Onana in the first game, I think, and Hojlund so far, you're just not even going to be in the squad. You're not an option for me anymore, despite not, you know, having a spat or a fallout or an attitude issue. Again, maybe when the window closes, that would change. And this is almost to put pressure on the owners as much as it is the players. But it does seem like we're having a bit of convincing to do to get people to leave. And to be fair, if me or you played for Man United, I wouldn't want to leave either. I'm a Man United fan. You know, I wouldn't want to just get kicked out because they'd had a couple of bad seasons. I'd get it. I'd understand it. And I'm sure Hojlund understands it. But I'd be trying to fight and stay as well.
You'd be 100% would be doing the Wolf of Wall Street, microphone in hand.
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
You know, tuxedo wearing, you know, cocktail sipping, Dave's hot chicken fueled.
But instead of all the crowd cheering, it'd be Jim Ratcliffe just unplugging the mic and everyone booing me. It'd be the exact opposite. I'm not leaving.
A slow clap out.
Why? Just get out, you crap. And
you don't think you'd have the rousing response that, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio managed in that film? No.
People do say we've both got a similar level of charisma, but no, I think on that note, I'd probably be ushered out the back door and sold for very, very small amount of money. Moving on to another player then that is in this sort of same situation, or worse, I guess, than Hojlund, because he's not played for United for a while and has fallen out with the manager. That's Alejandro Garnacho. There seems to be, you know, sort of a general understanding that a deal to Chelsea will happen, but no one knows when, for how much, or sort of what the details will be. And we've only got 6 days left. Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah, I just think Chelsea have been playing a waiting game this whole summer, haven't they? I think Garnacho's been up for the Chelsea move for several weeks, and it's just been a game of who blinks first, really, because Chelsea see a situation where the player's not playing, United aren't using him, they need to sell him, so why would you pay top dollar for him? United will say, well, listen, other wingers that have done not as much as him in the game have been going for 50-55 million pounds, and so we're absolutely entitled, whatever his situation is, to demand that kind of fee. So let's see where it lands. I still would expect this one to get resolved with him going to Chelsea, but it might be right up to deadline, because you've got two clubs here who don't want to lose an inch. So let's see what the kind of final price is. But Chelsea love signing players, don't they? So I think United will probably have a position that, well, come on, just sign another one and pay sort of fair market value for him.
It's just bizarre, isn't it? The whole Chelsea thing. It's almost like Chelsea have opened everyone's eyes to how much you can actually spend as well.
Well, do you remember when
Arsenal?
in Ed Woodward's sort of tenure, it was basically put out, clubs can only really sign 3 players each summer. I mean, Chelsea have just absolutely dismantled that, not least, for the financial point of view, as you were saying there, but also just from the practicalities, having people on these calls, managing to get deals over the line. I think certainly you can do more than 3 deals in a window. Maybe not as many as Chelsea's, I don't know, whatever it is, 10, 12, but they've shown certainly a more eagerness to do it.
Who was it that they sold? They sold someone last week, and they'd bought him last season, I think. He'd played like 1 or 2 Premier League games. They'd bought him for 12 million and sold him this week for 24 million.
Wow. Okay.
You think, where's this? How is this happening? Why are they just accepted that Chelsea are like the CEX of football teams, aren't they? Where your like Xbox game to them is worth £3, and then it's on the shelf at $14.99, and people are buying it. And every other club, if you go somewhere, don't play for a year, your value goes down. At Chelsea, your value goes up by not playing, because we all just accept they're so mad in the transfer market that you just sort of have to give them what they want. It's so weird that they've situated themselves to have this kind of inverted value of their players compared to almost everyone else in the league. And look at Man United. We've got players who, like Garnacho, has done a lot, played a lot of games, has scored plenty of goals. He's not prolific, but he's got a lot more goals and assists to his name than a lot of these players we're talking about. And yet we're struggling to get 40 million for him. And Chelsea will get 30 million for some bloke who's never played. I can't even believe how they've managed to do it. Let's move on to Anthony then, another one that everyone's biding their time. Last few days of the window, he's only got one club he wants to go to. United are going to have to do a deal with an option to extend with an Oh, come on, Laurie, what's happening here?
I sound like a broken record, don't I? But I think he's wanted Real Betis. I think Real Betis have wanted him. The financials have been the issue. We're getting now to the final week, so I think there's some movement there. But how it actually looks in the final shake of things, because I think you are right. There's been discussions over permanent, but then loan with an option or an obligation. Certainly United, I can't see how they would sanction a loan with an option. I think it needs to have, meetable obligation clauses, really, because otherwise what's the point of doing it, really? His wages aren't massive. It's not like they're making a Marcus Rashford type saving on his salary. So but I do think that one again will get done. Just exactly when, I don't know.
Right. Well,
pensive.
I guess I better let you get back off to your holiday, or
it's looking very sunny outside,
whatever
actually.
It is.
Yeah, well, they're letting me out. Yeah, they're letting me out in the yard for an hour of exercise. And
oh, that's good. Yeah. That's very nice of them to do so. And thank you for thank them for letting you record and come on the podcast today. Laurie, as always, absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you for coming on, giving us those details. Thank you very much, Laurie.
See you later.
Right, thank you very much for joining us at home. This has been Inside United with Laurie Whitwell. We'll see you in a bit.